Social networks like Facebook and Twitter facilitate interactions between individuals. Every message I send to you on Facebook goes through Facebook's servers before reaching you. This is known as the client-server model. And since the early days of the internet, engineers have always envisioned a peer-to-peer model where I could communicate to you directly without a company or some other kind of middleman brokering that relationship. Andre Staltz works on Scuttlebutt, a peer-to-peer system for social graphs, identity, and messaging. Scuttlebutt is used by this group of open-source hackers, many of whom live off-grid, and they don't have constant access to the internet. In this episode, we discuss why someone would want a peer-to-peer, off-the-grid social network. We discuss how to build one, and the progress that's been made on Scuttlebutt by some of the most talented open-source engineers in the world. This is a great episode. I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope to do more shows about these off-grid group of hackers who I had not heard about before I did this episode. Do you want the flexibility of a non-relational key-value store together with the query capabilities of SQL? Take a look at CTreeAce by Faircom. CTreeAce is a non-relational key-value store that offers ACID transactions complemented by a full SQL engine. CTreeAce offers simultaneous access to the data through non-relational and relational APIs. Companies use CTreeAce to process ACID transactions through non-relational APIs for extreme performance while using the SQL APIs to connect third-party apps or query the data for reports or business intelligence. CTreeAce is platform and hardware agnostic, and it's capable of being embedded, deployed on premises, or in the cloud. Faircom has been around for decades, powering applications that most people use daily. Whether you are listening to NPR, shipping a package through UPS, paying for gas at the pump, or swiping your Visa card in Europe, Faircom is powering you through your day. Software Engineering Daily listeners can download an evaluation version of CTreeAce for free by going to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Faircom. Thanks to Faircom CTreeAce for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and you can go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Faircom to check it out and support the show. Andre Staltz is an open source hacker. Andre, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you for inviting, Jeff. Very nice to be here.
Yeah. So you came to my attention when I read your blog post, which is called An Off-the-Grid Social Network.
Right.
It's about this peer-to-peer system for social graphs and identity and messaging. It's called Scuttlebutt. So explain what Scuttlebutt is.
So Scuttlebutt is basically just a peer-to-peer database, but the purpose is to implement a social network. And I'm talking really something that really looks like Facebook. Now it's sort of like entirely peer-to-peer, which means that you can use it even in the same LAN. So it's not something. It's not like Bitcoin where you need to be connected to the internet. You know, you can still be like. So it has this sort of mesh effect. There are some types of P2P which are sort of mesh. You know, that's basically in a nutshell. Of course, there's a lot to it, but let's see.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So there have been other attempts at peer-to-peer social networks prior to Scuttlebutt. What had been the shortcomings of those other social networks?
Right. So the one that comes to mind right now is Diaspora, which got that attention some years ago. And if I remember correctly, even Mark Zuckerberg also donated to that project. But like Diaspora is quite a different idea because it's what we call federated social networks. So it's like sort of like email that you need to have all these different servers that will give out accounts to you. So you still needed to like register to it with, you know, an email and a password. So that means that your account was on one of these Diaspora servers. And So that's a totally different approach to what Scuttlebutt has, because in Scuttlebutt, you can't even have like an account and a password somewhere else because all of the data is on your computer. So one of the nice things, even for onboarding as a user experience, is that once you open the Scuttlebutt like client, there's actually many clients, that's it. You're in, because the only thing that you need is like a public and private key, so crypto, and that will identify you. That's sort of like your identity. Like I also remember a bit from diaspora. Like I wasn't one of the like early adopters or anything. I just watched it from the sides, but I remember they had all sorts of like implementation problems and security problems. So Scuttlebutt was built from the ground up, like with a lot of crypto in mind. So you could consider it like closer to Bitcoin in the sense of how serious it takes crypto. Mm-hmm. So like, for instance, your newsfeed is not just like some data in a database, but your newsfeed is like your messages are what we call sig chained. So signature chained. That means that each message will sort of sign the contents of the previous message. So everything is chained, and that is sort of to prevent tampering. So other people can't like pretend that you said something or skipped out some parts of your newsfeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get into the elements of the log structure. That this is, it's fundamentally a log structure. It's a append-only log structure. But let's kind of start with the network aspect and the higher level aspects. And we'll get into the technical stuff.
Yeah.
So you write in your post that, quote, with social networks like Facebook or Twitter, the network connections centralize with their servers. And this is what you're talking about here. In Scuttlebutt, the network architecture looks like the social architecture. Why is this important?
So this is important because people like don't tend to understand how the network connections are. Like I actually asked some friends, what do they think what happens when they use Facebook? They just actually thought that it goes through like radio waves, just like, phone calls and SMS happens. They thought that like you're using Facebook client that would like directly connect to your friend's Facebook client through radio waves. I mean, that's like people's sort of intuition if they don't know so much about technology. So that means that once that intuition is broken, they feel very surprised, or they feel like, this is wrong. So I have some sort of experience with that because in Brazil, where I come from, people use all these services, and sometimes the government decides to shut down one of these servers, such as like they shut down YouTube for a while, for 2 days or something like that. They shut down also WhatsApp in the same fashion. Just some judge decides that, if WhatsApp company and Facebook company don't comply, we're going to just shut down this thing in the whole place. And this is like so fundamental because like a lot of businesses in Brazil are run on WhatsApp, not to mention, personal communications and that kind of stuff. So people get surprised like, yo, what is this? I thought that I could just communicate directly with my friends and people that I need to do business with, but actually there was some kind of, thing in the middle. So I think that surprise is bad because most of the people don't understand how technology works. And they like our natural assumption is that, the network connections match the sort of interaction with people. So one of the ways that Scuttlebutt does that is like you can set up a server, but the server typically represents a community. So you can get an invite for that server. So let's say, we have a football club or a baseball club, and you want to invite everybody related to that club. So you set up a server and you send out invitations. So that will really match, the community and the people related. And the idea of Scuttlebutt is that you would have many of these for each community or a circle of friends or something like that. And then you're able to connect to everyone that you need,
Yeah. So Scuttlebutt was originally made by Dominique Tarr, and he's a developer who lives on a sailboat. And this guy is really interesting. Tell us more about Dominique Tarr.
So I wish I had met him in person. I met some other New Zealand people, so he's from New Zealand. And Dominic created a ton of NPM modules. and he started experimenting with some like ideas with peer-to-peer. Like originally he built Scuttlebutt, just the name Scuttlebutt. That was some kind of database that reflects what we have today. And then he noticed some security problems, and he made secure Scuttlebutt. So what we're talking about right now is actually secure Scuttlebutt and not just Scuttlebutt. But we just shorten it and we call it Scuttlebutt because actually the original Scuttlebutt is just sort of legacy now. So I don't really know like the motivations that Dominic has because I haven't met him. But I know that he and others in New Zealand, it's not just him, are very sort of oriented on avoiding capitalism, and they are looking into, you know, cooperatives and new models of like economy and society and that kind of stuff. They're really into this kind of things. So I would assume that motivated some of their work here with Secure Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, after Trump won the election, I was looking into like where are the places where you can go if like some sort of apocalypse breaks out, and I think New Zealand is like number one. Like New Zealand is the number one place for preppers and for people who want and people who just want to live in. Because you know, the impression I get looking at Dominique is like this guy he's really independent and he wants to be self-reliant as possible. He wants to be off the grid. It looks like he's just a full stack engineer, and when I say full stack, I mean like he can build his own self-navigating sailboat, which is just incredible.
That's just ridiculous. Yeah.
I mean, do you know anything more about him? Do you know, like, how does he make money, or does he just have money saved up from?
He does consulting, as far as I understood.
Right.
And a very very similar profile of person is also Substack or James Halliday, who made Browserify and 100 other NPM modules. So also James lives on Hawaii, and he tries to also build everything from scratch. You know, even his own house, basically. So yeah, these people have a different philosophy. And you mentioned about apocalypse, and I think that's a very interesting thing, because when you think about how was the internet built, you know, the question that sort of motivated the internet basically in DARPA was, you know, what happens if we get a nuclear bomb on this kind of data center on the East Coast, you know, or on the West Coast? Then they thought, you know, we need to sort of decentralize this kind of stuff, right? And I think we're starting to wake up, you know, to that scenario again. Not like an actual apocalypse, but in the sense that like the trend on the internet has been to centralize stuff, you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot. And now we're thinking like, okay, you know, these things can be vulnerable to abuse of power. So how do we decentralize, you know, again? So we're seeing this second trend. So I would say that like this is the internet. Sometimes on the Scuttlebutt network, we talk about the old internet, which is basically the web dominated by, you know, ICANN and Google and all these kind of companies. You know, that's not the actual like ideological internet that we had from 20 years or 10 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, this is the same conversation I had with, who is that controversial guy, Moldbug. The guy who works on Urbit is basically the same thing, like lamenting the fact that we had this big dream of going to a peer-to-peer architecture for the internet, and we've ended up with client-server centralization, not even from the standpoint of like, oh, these nasty corporations and their centralization, but just like it's less fault-tolerant.
Yeah, it's less fault tolerant, and we can see that pretty clearly. Like not so much or yet in America, but like in Brazil, you know, people can just shut down WhatsApp, and that's really a bummer. You know, it really affects people's lives on a, you know, in a very strong way. So yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and you know, we'll get back to Scuttlebutt in a sec, but I mean, these people like Substack, do you know, are they driven by this wanting to be prepared for some kind of societal collapse, or is it more like just raw self-reliance, or is it just some combination of those things?
So I won't speak on behalf of their motivations, but as far as I've like, you know, understood what is evoking from them is basically, you know, a realization that some structures we have can't be trusted, and also a realization that, hey, I don't actually need them. You know, I can actually live on my own. That's totally possible. Right. And that type of, you know, lifestyle where, you know, yeah, like, sure, I could live under the system, but I don't need you. So thank you very much, I'll do my own stuff, that type of behavior.
Dice.com will help you accelerate your tech career. Whether you're actively looking for a job or need insights to grow in your role, Dice has the resources that you need. Dice's mobile app is the easiest and fastest way to get ahead. Search thousands of jobs from top companies. Discover your market value based on your unique skill set. Uncover new opportunities with Dice's new career pathing tool, which can give you insights about the best types of roles to transition to. Dice will even suggest the new skills that you'll need to make the move. Manage your tech career and download the Dice Careers app on Android or iOS today. And to check out the Dice website and support Software Engineering Daily, go to dice.com/SEDaily. Thanks to Dice for being a continued sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. And if you want to support the show and check out some new career opportunities, go to dice.com/SEDaily. It's appealing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's appealing even for me, somebody who is very reliant on the system.
Yeah.
Just that there is this occasional sense of anxiety that if the system blows up, then I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to need to figure things out from scratch. Anyway, so let's get back to Scuttlebutt. So let's take a top-down approach. Can you describe the UX for a typical user who is getting started with Scuttlebutt for the first time?
Yeah, so the typical approach is you go to our website, which is, by the way, centralized, but you need to start from somewhere. So that's Scuttlebutt NZ, and there we have a ton of instructions, and then you're basically going to install a desktop app. We have many, but we have the sort of most common one is called Patchwork. That's a client for Scuttlebutt. Then you download that, and you're basically on the network. Now, that means that you're connected to no one in the beginning. So when you open the desktop application and you haven't done anything else, then you're going to see emptiness. Now there's a couple of ways of getting data, and that means that one of the ways is that you connect to some pub. That's what we call a server. So you need to get an invite from someone. And also on Scuttlebutt NZ, we have some links there to some pubs that you can sort of like join with a free for everyone invite. And the other way is basically being on the same LAN, local area network, as someone else, and then you're basically already seeing each other through that client app, and you can just discuss. So sometimes, let's say if someone is on Scuttlebutt already, or let's say that they have a lot of data, so there's no sort of like global idea of what is Scuttlebutt, just like there's no global idea of there's no global registry of all of the one-to-one physical conversations that are happening right now, right? Because that's the idea of a mesh. But let's say that some person has a lot of data on their Scuttlebutt client. You can just connect to the same Wi-Fi as them, and then your client is going to start downloading almost everything that person has, and they're basically on that network, because then there's going to be some metadata on who else is on that network and other kinds of pubs. So you start discovering that kind of thing. So you basically don't need to make an account, because once you open the client app, it will generate a public and private key, and that's your identity. So your public key, you pass that as if it would be your username. Now, there can't be global usernames, because someone in China could select the username John, and someone in America could select the same username John. And because it's a mesh, they can't really just like say that this, just like you can't have unique names for people on the planet, same problem.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, Scuttlebutt uses this protocol, Secure Scuttlebutt, SSB.
Yeah.
And this can spread information even in the absence of typical internet service providers. Give more description for how SSB works.
So, Secure Scuttlebutt is the database. Now everything is based on that database. There is a protocol for like network called Secret Handshake. under Secure Scuttlebutt, which basically does key exchange. And there's a white paper written by Dominic explaining how secret handshake works. So that's just a way of, two entities that have their public keys of just exchanging information, as far as I understand. And then, so the database only has news feeds. So it's a pretty simple system because it's kind of like Twitter, right? So you have accounts, and accounts can be bots, accounts can be real people. And basically the only thing you have there is just a news feed. And so there's not any kind of other place where data is stored, because every sort of metadata can be also a message, such as, I am following John Smith. That will be a message on my newsfeed. And also, I liked what John Smith just said. The like is also a message on my newsfeed. So everything is recorded on that as if it would be my diary, my sort of, everything that I do. So even things like, my description of who I am, that's just a message on my newsfeed. So then there are different ways of how you can like share that diary or log with other computers. So one of them is like LAN. So when you're in the same local area network, it's going to do multicast DNS. So that means that you're basically broadcasting your newsfeed to whoever is on that network. So that means that, other peers are going to see that and sort of sync their knowledge of what is your newsfeed. So your newsfeed is also immutable, so you can't actually delete any message. And that's how also, things are sig chained, so chained with signatures. And it may sound like a downside that you can't delete anything, but that's actually pretty good because you can't actually delete things in real life. Let's say, things that you said. If you say something on a stage to a lot of people, you can't just tell them like, hey, forget that I said this, like permanently and reliably forget that I said this, right? People have their own memories, and you just can't do that. So it's the same case with Scuttlebutt that, you can tell people like, hey, try to delete what I just said, but you can't guarantee that people will delete that. And I think that's quite an honest approach, because on the internet, you can't actually delete content, right? There's still let's say the Internet Archive, and you can take screenshots of whatever people say. So it's not really reliable to just like try to delete data. And I think Scuttlebutt doesn't have like a downside. I think it's just being honest about the nature of data.
The append-only ideas are quite popular in software architecture today. I think This is just one side effect of storage getting so cheap, as people start to say, okay, what can we do with infinite storage? Well, we can shift our entire architecture to having this single event store where you have a append-only log of everything that has happened, every change to the state of our application, whether you're talking about Netflix or Facebook or Twitter. You can put everything chronologically such that if an error occurs or if an outage occurs and you lose a database, as long as you have the event store, you can replay all the events in the event store in order to restore everything. And that's sort of what Scuttlebutt is doing. And, I think this architecture has been studied a lot by blockchain people, because the blockchain people are trying to create an immutable append-only transaction log for finance. And it's,
Right.
well, not all blockchains are for finance, but Bitcoin, obviously. Now, I know that blockchains often use a data structure called a Merkle tree. I don't remember exactly how that works, but I remember. Is there a similar approach in Scuttlebutt?
That's a good question. There might be. So, like, just explain a little bit what the Merkle tree is. I'm not an expert in these things, but as far as I understand,
I don't remember. Okay.
Yeah, it's a hash of hashes. So you can have like a lot of data, and then you just hash parts, and that's I think how BitTorrent and torrent in general is, that you can create a quite small hash out of like a lot of data,
right,
type of stuff.
It's a compression tool as well?
I wouldn't comment on that. I think in general, hash is just sort of like it's not compressed, because you can't like get that data back just from the hash. But Yeah, as far as I understand, I dig into Scuttlebutt quite a lot, and I didn't see something similar to a Merkle tree.
Okay.
Yeah, but you mentioned like events and the whole history of events, and I think that's in general an approach called event sourcing, and
Yeah, event
we use
sourcing.
that almost every day with Git. So Git is also append only kind of, and
Yeah.
one of the interesting things is that people already built a Git layer on top of Scuttlebutt because there are like similar type of databases. So they just sort of wrote that adapter, and
Right. I mean,
yeah,
that's. I think that's kind of profound. Like that's how all of the. I mean, even GitHub is essentially a social network, and
yeah,
identity is core to what GitHub is. So it's interesting that at the core of Scuttlebutt is this idea that you have an identity, which is
yeah,
manifested in your crypto keys, and then your information, which is just in this log,
yeah.
append only log. And you can build essentially any popular internet application off of those features alone.
Yeah, like there are a ton of ideas, like such as SoundCloud as well. I'm sorry, SoundCloud. Yeah, it's a bit.
Yeah.
So they already built also a SoundCloud clone or inspired service on top of Scuttlebutt. It's called Ferment. And so for the data itself, like let's say the songs or the music, that's stored, I think, in BitTorrent or something like that. But, SoundCloud is also a social network because you can follow people and that kind of stuff. And I think there's a ton of other stuff like Instagram. It's basically just a Facebook without text. It's just images. I don't know. There's a ton of stuff. Maybe not something like Snapchat, right? Because it basically deletes data constantly. And I think that's okay because it's an honest approach. You can definitely just record your mobile screen and then you won't, you will have that data forever, right? If you watch something on Snapchat. So, but there's definitely a ton of things that could be built. And the Git layer right now works really well. And it's actually comparable to GitHub because let's say when you push a repo to the Git SSB layer, SSB stands for Scuttlebutt or Secure Scuttlebutt. Then you're basically pushing a bunch of messages to your personal log, so your newsfeed log. And those messages are just Git commits, like the content is that. So one nice thing is that the push is immediate because it's just getting from your repo and putting that to your local Scuttlebutt database. So you don't need to wait for any for a considerable amount of time. And also, if you're in the same network as, let's say, a bunch of coworkers, they will be able to get that with very high speed because you're on the same network. And then you can also run git ssb web, and that runs a local server, like some HTML server. And then you can open that on your browser and you see something that looks like GitHub. So you have there the README, you have issues, you have pull requests. And when you open an issue, that will create a message on your Scuttlebutt log. So then, it just works kind of. It's very interesting approach.
So if I get on the same Wi-Fi as somebody else with Scuttlebutt, then Scuttlebutt can just spread the information that I have seen with the information that the other person has seen and resolve the diff. Can you describe what happens in a sharing event?
A sharing event. What do you mean with sharing event?
So by sharing event, I mean so I should have used that terminology. So like let's say I've gone off and I've scuttlebutted with a couple other people, and then my friend has gone off and scuttlebutted with another couple people, and then me and my friend connect to the same Wi-Fi, and our logs are going to merge, right? Like we're going to so that the information spreads sort of like a gossip protocol sort of. Can you describe like what happens there? I mean, does it just get appended on, or what's
I mean, it gets appended because you only see, what am I missing, and then you add that. So the diff is always pluses, you don't have minuses because we don't have delete. And now you may ask, do I want data from my friend, even like his friends and their friends? So one of the important things is that there's always choice. So because everything is in the client, right? There's no sort of like server which decides stuff. everything is decided on your client. So it's like potentially configurable that you can say, I only want to get feeds from this friend, or friends of that specific friend, or friends of all of my friends, or 2 hops after that. You can configure all of these things. So of course you don't need to like necessarily get all of the data that he has. Now, of course, we have a default there. I think it's 2 hops, so friends of friends, and you end up getting a lot of data sometimes from people that you don't immediately recognize. But as I said, everything is on the client, so you can also say, I don't want data from these type of people, so you can just block them. And yeah, so you can configure all these things.
It sounds like you don't have the same problem that you get with financial blockchain, because with the financial blockchain, you need everybody to have a copy of the entire transaction log, unless you want to build some sort of centralization on top of it, which a lot of people are doing, and that's totally fine. It's just that if that were the case, then you would have needed to gather everybody's information, and that would quickly not scale, because if you want to keep everything client-side, you don't want to have this giant record that includes the entire social network.
Yeah. So finance is fundamentally very different, because, you can transact money with anyone. So, of course, there needs to be this sort of global knowledge of what is money, right? And in the Scuttlebutt docs, we call this global singleton, which is like a single, let's say, shared module that everyone references. Now, in Scuttlebutt, things are just mesh, so you don't need to have the information about everything, because it's really sort of based on relationships. It's much simpler to understand than all kinds of other things, because the data is your news feeds and your friends' news feeds, and that's pretty much it, So, of course, you can make more friends and that type of stuff.
For more than 30 years, DNS has been one of the fundamental protocols of the internet. Yet, despite its accepted importance, it has never quite gotten the due that it deserves. But today's dynamic applications, hybrid clouds, and volatile internet demand that you rethink the strategic value and importance of your DNS choices. Oracle Dyn provides DNS that is as dynamic and intelligent as your applications. Dyn DNS gets your users to the right cloud service, the right CDN, or the right data center, using intelligent response to steer traffic based on business policies, as well as real-time internet conditions, like the security and the performance of the network path. Dyn maps all internet pathways every 24 seconds via more than 500 million trace routes. This is the equivalent of 7 light years of distance, or 1.7 billion times around the circumference of the Earth. With over 10 years of experience supporting the likes of Netflix, Twitter, Zappos, Etsy, and Salesforce, Dyn can scale to meet the demand of the largest web applications. Get started with a free 30-day trial for your application by going to dyn.com/sedaily. That's dyn.com/sedaily. After the free trial, Dyn's developer plans start at just $7 a month for world-class DNS. Rethink DNS. Go to dyn.com/sedaily to learn more and get your free trial of Dyn DNS. So with blockchain, Bitcoin, for example, the way that Bitcoin is moving is, assuming Bitcoin works out, it looks like it's going to work out, at least from my point of view. I mean,
It's been working.
It's been working. You get people like Blockstream who want to build these side chains and Lightning networks on top of it. And what these things allow is just faster transactions, because you get these trust networks, so you don't have to necessarily have the entire blockchain be copied to everybody's node. You get these centralized agencies of trust and brokerage.
Yeah.
So you could imagine people building nodes of centralization on Scuttlebutt. So for example, if I want to have a in-browser version of Scuttlebutt, and I just want to hit some server, if I do want to have client server, I mean, that's the thing, that's what's cool about Scuttlebutt, is you could imagine client server level Facebook on top of it, and it would be totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It wouldn't be mutually exclusive with the peer-to-peer beauty of Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, and actually, just to mention quickly, there's some clients. I think one of them is called PatchFoo that do exactly that. So it's running on the server, and it's a way for people to get it running in the browser instead of downloading a separate client. So they could also use it, on mobile or other devices, and that's totally fine. I mean, it's something you can do, as you said. Do you have?
Yeah, because it would be cool. I mean, I think Scuttlebutt's a great idea. I think it's really cool, and it would also be cool if, the disadvantage is, under the current situation, my mom is never going to use Scuttlebutt because she would have to download it and set up her.
I wouldn't say never. I would say in the current situation,
right?
Because it can reach a point which is quite user friendly, especially if we think of like mobile. If we put Scuttlebutt on mobile, then you just need to download an app. And that's it. Usually you need to download an app and make a user account, which is also the annoying part. People don't like making new accounts and setting up passwords and confirming in their email. It's always a hassle. But with Scuttlebutt, it would literally be just download, open, and that's it.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's compelling that we are moving. I mean, if you look at Snapchat as a leading indicator, people are getting more interested in privacy technology, and I mean, you're seeing journalists. Every journalist is adopting Signal or Telegram or something encrypted that's allows them to collect encrypted information from sources. There is a public movement away from centralization. Who knows how far it will go, but it's there at least.
Yeah. I think people are starting to wake up about the problems that centralization can, create.
Yeah. Can you talk more about like the open source community of Scuttlebutt? Like, how do people work on different stuff, and what are the tasks and the features that people are working on right now?
Yeah, the development style is like, how to say, sort of, it's like sort of group driven. It's not so much like a benevolent dictator for light driven. So even if Dominic has been the original creator, we don't have this approach where Dominic dictates everything and that type of stuff. So we actually meet every Wednesday. I think we even have like a meeting this week where, we meet over voice chat and we go through like what's the latest news, what is each one working on. And it's totally volunteer based. So of course Dominic normally works on the actual protocol and the reliability of these kind of stuff. And then there's people working on the client apps like Patchwork and etc. And it's just volunteer driven. And the things that we're having right now are sort of like Dominic is making the network more reliable and the sort of network transfers faster. One of the things he's working on is called epidemic broadcast trees. Don't ask me what that means. It's pretty deep. He found some stuff from some papers that helps. Then the Patchwork development paused for a while because the main maintainer is just traveling for 2 weeks or something like that. But there's plenty of PRs coming for that because we got a lot of people into the network and they just wanted to improve stuff. So I think 2 days ago we had an update to the Patchwork client that made things look nicer. I'm working on getting Scuttlebutt working on mobile, and that's quite a challenge because I'm just basically getting the Node.js app and trying to put it with React Native. Now, those two things were not meant to be, and also React Native to some extent was not meant to be. It's kind of a hack. So it's a hack on top of a hack.
That's right.
Things are sort of slowly working. It's incredibly painful to get it working. But I think it's probably less effort than rebuilding all of the protocol for iOS and for Android. And I think things are possible. We just need sort of UDP and TCP and LevelDB is the main sort of database part where all the news feeds are, and some crypto stuff. So all of these things exist already for native, for Android and iOS. We just need to find how to get all these things talking together talking with each other in the proper way.
We just had a show about React Native and the Expo team.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about what are the challenges that you're encountering trying to migrate? So I guess you answered my next question, which is going to be what language is this written in? I guess it's all in JavaScript, right?
Yeah, it's all JavaScript. Of course, we use LevelDB and Sodium. So LevelDB is for the database, and Sodium is the crypto. And all of those those two are like C based, so they're native. So they're the native modules in Node. So Node sometimes have these native stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So as you're migrating this to React Native,
yeah,
describe how that looks, or what are the challenges that you're encountering?
So there is a thread thread in Scuttlebutt network, which is also accessible through HTML. There's a way where I describe all of my sort of hurdles with that. And basically, I was trying to get the TCP layer working. So there's basically a polyfill for React Native. I think it's called React Native TCP, where it basically just imitates the TCP sockets that Node has. And that mostly works. I noticed that there was a problem with it, that, when you create the sort of constructor, you create the TCP socket with the constructor, it didn't support giving opts and, things like that, where like not all of the like parts are polished for all of these polyfills. And you find bugs here, bugs there. One of the biggest challenges is that React Native doesn't support synchronous API. So if you do something like file system read directory synchronously, they just can't support that in React Native. I think it's because of how the threads work, that you just can't expect things to be there immediately. So there's some waiting involved always. It would be good if everything would be like asynchronous, callback based, so that we can do everything. So I need to map out all of those parts that use synchronous APIs and try to re-architect things to use asynchronous. I raised this issue also with sort of the protocol people like Dominic, and they acknowledged that, we should try to find a way to only use async. So there's a ton of stuff. I got to some point where like you open the sort of very raw app and it generates your private and public key. That's good. Stores them. That's good also. It's a milestone. And then I got some sort of network connections working with my computer. So the computer would send some message to my phone through TCP on LAN and vice versa. And I'm trying to get like the news feeds to sync. So that's my next milestone, to actually get a news feed from A to B and backwards.
I always admire people who work on projects like this, because this is not the kind of thing where you can just search Stack Overflow for
no way.
how to do this. What do people talk about on Scuttlebutt? Because I imagine today it's just like a bunch of developers, like basically open source hackers, and maybe some privacy advocates who are maybe not hackers as much, but are just interested in this technology. And it's always like social networks. Always, the early days are so fascinating. Like I was an early user of Quora. Yeah. And Quora was so interesting in the early days because the network was seeded with just venture capitalists and like engineers and entrepreneurs, and it was a very fascinating web of information. And back in the day, I was a poker player, and I was on this poker forum, and the social networks really, the memes and the utilities that develop within a social network are completely reflective of the people in that social network. So how does that manifest on Scuttlebutt?
So you are correct to imagine that most of the people there are developers. There are some also non-developers, friends of friends, and that type of connections. And it's interesting how the blog post that I wrote like evoked this sort of lifestyle of off-grid. And a lot of people interested in this topic of living off-grid started joining, and there was a lot of sort of like discussions around that. Typically we had before that like discussions on open source, on decentralization in general, like living in a decentralized fashion with off-grid and that type of stuff. Nowadays, we get a lot of questions as well, how the thing works. But I think it's a really good thing that we target developers first, because the platform needs to improve in many areas before we can start like putting like all kinds of people. And I think it's good that we attract developers in the beginning. And, you know, for instance, I myself was attracted to this network, and I'm helping with the mobile part. And people who find other types of lacking things will also probably feel like helping in those areas that lack, you know.
What about the conversations that actually take place? Are people tweeting about what they had for breakfast, or what their self-driving sailboat is doing today? Or
so actually,
what exactly are they?
Sometimes, yeah, like those two things that you just mentioned. Yes, like Dominic has like written about how his sailboat, you know, is going to face some kind of cyclone, and he also said like, today I like fished the squid and I ate it for breakfast. And He had a picture of the squid there. It was like white squid, and he said it tasted like just sponge. So yeah, and also Substack or James Halliday is like often posting about how he's building his own home with his partner, and you know, it's pretty interesting. Like if you were interested in what I wrote in the blog post, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. They have so much stuff there going on. But I think like in general the discussions are like mostly development, also philosophy, and also all kinds of like economy and things like that. And like I haven't had the need to block anyone yet, you know, even though I'm getting data from all kinds of like people who have no idea who they are. I haven't had the need to block anyone. So there are pretty good vibes there going on.
If you reach a certain scale, there is going to be the moderation issue. I wonder how you could solve moderation.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I don't think we have any idea, like we don't have an equivalent notion of moderation as you have in, let's say, Facebook or Twitter. Of course, you can block people. So if you see someone who you just don't want to like read the things they say, you can just block them. Now, what cannot be done is that, you know, two people in Japan are talking nasty stuff and you want to forbid them to talk those stuff. You just can't do that. Right. Just like you can't forbid people from saying nasty stuff with two walkie-talkies, right? Even the creator of the walkie-talkie has no power in preventing people, you know, from using it however they want. It's the same idea here. We really cannot control what people do with it. It's like technically impossible.
How much of tech needs to, like, because this idea is basically like you're building the core of a protocol that you can build other applications on top of that's peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
You're building it for, I mean, you're building the client for iPhone.
Yeah.
Does it make you think, like, are you starting to wonder, like, how much other decentralized technology, like, do we need some decentralized hardware? Do we need open source cell phones to truly get to the, you know, the dreams of peer-to-peer that people want? Because it seems like we're just moving towards a world where, you know, some people are working on peer-to-peer stuff at a pace that's, you know, is as cutting edge as the people working on centralized stuff.
Yeah. So, like, one of the things that peer-to-peer network like Scuttlebutt introduces is the need for storage, you know, because all of that data is with you all the time. Typically, you don't have that with Facebook or something else. You download that always. And so the amount of data can get quite a lot. Like currently, my client stores, I think, around 2 gigabytes. Most of it is just images. And the actual logs, like the news feeds, they are around 100 or something megabytes. So, I mean, that's okay. That's manageable because you can just delete pictures. Those are sort of like not essential for the, let's say, signature chaining part. And then that's like most of the data. And 100 megabytes or 200 or 300 is just not a problem, even for mobile phones. But, you know, at some point, let's say you're using it for 10 years, maybe it starts becoming a problem. And I think, you know, sometimes like demand drives supply. Just like we have 4K TVs nowadays, you know, didn't have those 20 years ago. So people demanding better image just drove the supply for better TVs. And I think, you know, maybe in 20 years from now, if like peer-to-peer social networks are a thing and they demand a lot of storage, then your phones are just going to have 3 terabytes of storage or something like that, you know?
Are there scenarios?
Touch the question that you were.
No, absolutely. Are there scenarios in Scuttlebutt that are similar to the idea of where because in Bitcoin you can lose your wallet, the credentials to your wallet, and then you just lose your ability to access your account. I presume the same problem exists in Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, the same problem exists, and there's nothing that we can do about it other than you being very smart about keeping your data. So there are some approaches to this in Bitcoin that work quite well. Let's say the recovery words. So you can have like 24 words that will generate your key. So you could just use that and store it like as a paper somewhere, and then you'll be fine. The other approach is that you sort of leave the key management to someone else. You just store it in some kind of bank and you log in as you do today, right? You can do that with Bitcoin. Why couldn't you do that with Scuttlebutt? But I think what's important is that people have the choice. You know, I can store my key in some kind of bank that handles it for me, or I can store it myself in all kinds of different ways, right? But we just essentially cannot. It's impossible. No one has the authority over all of the accounts, so we cannot just recover things for people if they lose it.
How is the growth trajectory looking like for Scuttlebutt?
It's a bit hard to estimate what's going to happen, but I myself am investing a lot of time into this, and I think now that like the activity gone up, Dominic and others are also very excited about putting effort into this, and we'll see. We'll see how people react to it. I have a lot of plans of how to make it mainstream. That blog post I released was just like one piece of the whole plan, and I definitely plan to put a lot of different content pointing to Scuttlebutt. And so I really want to help this go mainstream. Probably not to the extent that it replaces Facebook, because that's like a humongous challenge, but just having enough people and enough resources that so that people know that there's an alternative, right? If I want to leave Facebook, where do I go? Right now, most of the people would say I have no idea. But maybe in the future, people would have some idea of, what to do if they want to leave Facebook.
Well, it seems like the way we're going is we'll have as many social networks as we do television channels, because it's becoming so easy to build a social network, and we have so much unexplored territory in terms of social networks. I mean, there's a bunch of these things, Musical.ly, Instagram, Quora, GitHub, and it's just going to keep growing. There's going to be more and more of these things. So when you say you want to invest a lot, you want to make it into mainstream, are you potentially thinking about starting a business around Scuttlebutt eventually?
Not necessarily, but I don't exclude that possibility either. And I would actually disagree with what you just said, because
okay,
respectfully disagree.
Sure.
Because we used to have a lot of social networks when Facebook wasn't the largest thing ever. I mean, we had, let's say, MySpace, we had Orkut, we had all kinds of stuff. And I think the tendency nowadays is that Facebook, because it's the biggest, people have the assumption that everyone is on Facebook. So it becomes like something huge, just makes it become even bigger. And now with all of the Snapchat features being replicated in Facebook, I would say probably Snapchat won't have a bright future, So,
my belief around Facebook, this is what Peter Thiel, the first investor in Facebook, what he said he thought was the core value of Facebook is that it enforced the real identity. Is it makes you put your real identity. You can only have one account. It's your only thing. On Twitter you can have multiple different accounts.
Yeah.
And that can be replicated, right? You can Google has it Facebook, and Google developed independently, but you have your real identity on Google, sort of. I guess I have multiple Google accounts. One is for work, one is for non-work. But just the notion that you put some sort of stake in the ground that this is your real identity, and you perhaps provide some sort of verification around that identity. I think that's really the novel approach that Facebook took, and obviously that compounds interest because as you're building up more identity features on Facebook, it becomes more like your true identity. But that's not to say that you can't build a separate identity platform.
Yeah, I don't know what to comment.
Okay, fair enough. I don't mean to argue with you. I'm just saying, like, I think Facebook is quite dominant right now, but I think it could be rivaled in the future. And I mean, I certainly want way more social networks, and I can think of plenty of social network ideas where I would not want Facebook integrated with it.
Yeah. Well, right now we sort of have like that effect, but for IM chats. So some people are on Signal, some people are on WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger and all kinds of, different ways. And it can be a pro and it can be also a con, A lot of people feel annoyed that there's different ways of contacting people. So I don't know, like I wouldn't say that like what Facebook is doing right now is good, because then we're basically giving them the monopoly over communications. And
I do feel like there's a growing allergy towards Facebook. How do you feel about Facebook these days?
I feel very negative about it because it's just such a monopoly. It's basically like digitalizing your relationship. So we're just digitalizing all kinds of stuff nowadays, and Facebook happens to be digitalizing your relationships and just making profit out of it. And I think that the way that it does that is by presenting itself as a necessary evil, because even like publishers are not like happy about Facebook, but it's just, they just have to be there because everybody is there. And the same effect for people who are using it as users. They just have to be there because people are there, So of course Facebook tries to like create an excellent image of themselves and how they want to connect the world and etc., and how they want to keep everybody comfortable, all the users and that kind of stuff. But essentially we are ended up with no choice. I mean, people are just kind of on Facebook because it's the big necessary thing. The other day I wanted to go to this bar in Stockholm with friends, and I wanted to use the Wi-Fi, but you needed to connect to Facebook. I mean, and like their page. I mean, it's like there was no choice. Once you connected to their Wi-Fi, they would open their Facebook page, and you had to like that. Otherwise, you would just not get access to their Wi-Fi. And guess what? My computer blocks every link from Facebook. I just did that, and so I just didn't have internet. Yeah.
Wow.
So we are getting to that stage where Facebook will just be absolutely necessary, and people are going to have that assumption in their brains that it's just necessary, and then we may have no choice if we don't like build an alternative. And I think and that's why really I want to do something about Scuttlebutt, so I have that choice.
Well, yeah, it's a noble pursuit, and I hope Dominique or Substack ends up hearing this episode. I'd love to have them on the show and talk more about this growing, I mean, not just the growing allergy to Facebook, but just the peer-to-peer efforts. It's so, the peer-to-peer crowd and this off-the-grid people are so interesting to me, because these are people who they're so technically able, and yet they choose to opt out of the
technical world, basically.
The technical world. Like, they choose to opt out of the world that could give them massive, massive amounts of money and power. Yeah,
actually, a good terminology that's going around in Scuttlebutt to describe these people are solar punks. They're people who are sort of, kind of related to cyberpunks, that they have low life, high tech, but they have a very optimistic view of the world and how we can use like solar power to just be independent, and just get our resources from the ultimate source of resource, which is the sun.
That's
and
awesome.
That kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
You should definitely invite them, because I don't know if I represented them correctly here. Of course, I don't know them in person.
Yeah.
So maybe they have different views of the world.
That's beautiful. I would love to have some of those people on. Okay, well, Andre, thanks for coming on to talk about Scuttlebutt. I really liked your article. It was a really great overview. Really, really concise yet very well developed. I'll put it in the show notes. I think the listeners will like it too. So thanks again, Andre.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again to Symphono for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. for almost a year now. Your continued support allows us to deliver this content to the listeners on a regular basis.
Wow!